This is my first time posting on Reddit, and after reading heaps of stories on here, I can't help but want to share my own Let's Not Meet experience. To give some context, I was 14 when this happened and I was with my best friend Holly, who was 17. We were both very small ladies and obviously at that time, very young. It was Friday night and Holly and I went to her friend's place for a little get-together. Despite both being underage, we drank way too much, and by the time we decided to go home at midnight, we weren't very steady on our feet. We lived in a small city in Canada, and for the most part, it was pretty safe. I was spending the night at Holly's place, and as we were drunk, we took the short bus ride home. The closest bus stop was about 1 kilometer from her place. The bus stop is a park and ride, so there was a well-lit parking lot, and the rest of the walk was on a quiet residential road with no street lighting. We walked this route heaps and didn't think twice about walking it on this particular night. We got off the bus, both still drunk and enjoying our walk back to hers. We walked through the parking lot, which had a few cars parked, and started into the darkness. Everything was pretty ordinary thus far, but I noticed Holly got quiet and started to walk faster. I figured she was sobering up and keen to get home, so I started walking faster to keep up. She looked at me, seeing I was oblivious to my surroundings, and told me that she thought someone was following us. I looked back to see a person walking behind us, but a decent distance away. No one else got off the bus with us, and no one was around when we got off the bus. So we reckoned this person came from the parking lot. We both started to sober up real quick, but tried to rationalize the situations against our gut instincts. We looked behind us every few seconds to gauge the situation, and we could see the person was gaining on us. We could now make out that the person was a full-grown male. We were both starting to panic and run scenarios through our head when Holly told me we need to run because he has a bat. We both started running, and as I did, I looked behind me to see this dude did have a baseball bat. I can't remember if he was running too or just spent walking, but he was still following us. I remember feeling this horrible urgency and panic overcome me, and just survival instincts kick in. Holly and I both knew we could not stop running until we were inside the door locked. I know from running track that if you look behind you while running, you slow down, and against all my instincts, I didn't look behind me, and after what seemed like ages, we made it home. We ran into the house shaking and crying, and luckily, Holly's dad was awake. We told him what had happened, and he had us call the cops while he got in his car. He wanted to drive the road to see if he could find the dude and get a better description for the police, but he didn't see him. I'm not sure when we lost him or if he followed us all the way home, but nothing ever came out of the situation. It's been over 10 years since this went down, and I try not to think about what could have happened, but the thought of a grown dude waiting in his car with a baseball bat for vulnerable people to walk by gives me goosebumps.
Do you ever get that feeling you're not alone? You know the feeling I'm talking about. It's not dependent on time of day. It's not that creepy feeling you get alone in the dark, or that feeling you get alone in bed during a thunderstorm. It's so much deeper. You can be sitting at home during the middle of a sunny day, and it makes you look over your shoulder. That feeling that someone is watching you from the doorway while you watch TV, or that someone in the distance is watching you while you stroll down an abandoned street. What if I told you I knew who that was? What if I told you you weren't crazy? Would you believe me? I grew up believing monsters, ghosts, and demons weren't real. I believed as a child that the only things to fear were evil people. That all changed recently. I got to peek around the curtain. I'm not sure how much time I've got left. She knows that I know. I've made the conscious decision to type this out. I'm not sure if anyone will read it, but if the worst happens, at least you know it's here to be found. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe this is all in my head. A part of me hopes this is the case. I guess the best place to start is the beginning. Long story short, I spent 15 years working as a cop. In that time, I saw a lot of evil things. Those evil things were all the evil that men do. At some point, my mind gave way. I got the thumbs up. I had PTSD. That's not to say I needed to be locked away, or that my sanity had decided to leave me. The biggest problem I suffer from with my condition are hypervigilance and intrusive memories. I get the odd bout of overaggression, but I can calm down quickly as I feel it happen. The hypervigilance makes sleep impossible some nights. Think about the times you've had too much coffee. You can be tired as all hell, but you can't get that sleep. Your brain won't quite switch off. The intrusive memories are more inconvenient. I can be taking a shower, and my brain overloads with the memory of having a junkie spit in my eyes. I'll snap back to reality a few minutes, sometimes a few hours later. No recollection of the missing time. Just last week, I suffered one such episode. It wasn't a big deal. I was starting to get worked up. I could feel my aggression levels rising. I'd been stuck at home all day. I couldn't find my keys or my wallet. I knew they were in the house somewhere. I'd used the keys to get into the house the night before. I knew the wallet was somewhere there too. I'd used my credit card to make an online purchase before trying to go to sleep. I gave up before I flipped my lid completely. I went to the kitchen to make myself something to eat. That's when it happened. I grabbed the carving knife from the knife block to cut vegetables. I stared at the knife in my hand. My brain transported me back to the memory of another kitchen. I was back to one of the times I literally fought for my life. I tried to wrestle with a wife beater over a carving knife, knowing that if I lost, that blade would be in me up to the handle. I quickly went through the motions in my mind, counting, telling myself to calm down. It was all just a memory, desperately trying to cling to the here and now. By chance, while I was doing this, I looked at the kitchen window. That's when I saw her for the first time. In the reflection, standing behind me was a woman. Not in the conventional sense. I only used the term woman because of the shape. The closest thing I'd ever seen before was a rotting corpse fished out of the water. The woman was short and slender, wearing a tattered white summer dress. Her skin was grey and clung to her bones, just hanging. Her hair was white, not grey with age, rotten, white, like the colour had been bleached away. It hung matted to her head, partly covering her face all the way to her shoulders. She didn't have eyes. They were endless black pits, empty sockets. I dropped the knife into the kitchen sink while we locked eyes. She tilted her head to the side. Her mouth formed a grotesque grin. I turned around and she was gone. But I watched my wallet and keys hit the tiled floor where she'd been standing. I stood frozen in place for a few seconds. I calmed down and picked up my keys and wallet from the floor and put them into my pockets. I turned back to the sink to get back to dinner. The knife was gone. I searched the kitchen top to bottom and couldn't find it. I tried to tell myself that I didn't have the knife in the first place, but the chopped up carrots next to the sink told me this was a lie. I spent the day telling myself that it had all been in my head, just some new fun PTSD symptom that I'd have to endure. I found out very quickly that I couldn't have been more wrong. Over the next few days, I caught the image of the woman in the mirrors and windows around my home, always with the same grotesque grin spread across her face. She was toying with me. My bedroom wardrobe has sliding mirror doors. Yesterday morning, when I got fresh clothes out, I closed the wardrobe doors to see her standing behind me in the corner of the room. As she smiled and tilted her head, she held my carving knife. She lifted it and gently ran the blade down the side of her face. I turned around. Like always, she had vanished. I needed to go. Even just a handful of days of this had driven me to breaking point. Last night I booked a hotel. I took enough with me to stay for a few days. I took my pistol with me to make me feel safe. Last night at the hotel went without incident. No reflection of the woman in the room's mirrors. No feelings of being watched. I convinced myself before falling asleep on the couch in the room that the woman was all in my head. I've made her up. She is just temporary insanity. I woke up this morning and immediately felt a thud on my chest. I looked down to see my pistol had been dropped on top of me. It had been sitting on the coffee table beside me while I slept. My carving knife had been stabbed into the arm of the couch next to my head. My hotel room is where I'm typing this from now. I know she's watching me. I can feel it. She's here. She's found me. She's not in my head, she's real. I think she may have been with me my whole life. My recent PTSD episode has just given me the ability to see her, given her the powers to interact with me. I've got all the mirrors in the room covered over. I've got the curtains drawn. She's here somewhere watching me, with her head tilted to the side wearing that grotesque grin. If I can, I'll keep this going. But if you don't hear from me again, you know she's got me.
Posted by HK Paper Zombie. I used to work as a transporter. When I say transporter, I mean a transporter of the recently deceased. How this job would work is we would receive a text of a location and the name of the deceased. We would then go and pick up the freshly passed from their house, accident site, old folks' home, wherever they had passed. When we arrived at the location of the deceased, we would have to pack them up. That means handling them. A thing to keep in mind is bodies make noises, grunts, groans. They are still warm and stiff. We would then have to bag them up and move them onto a stretcher, then strap them down. Once they had been placed in the van, your partner would leave and you would drive the deceased to the funeral home. Here's the catch. Even if my partner was not in the van with me, I never felt alone. Once the door was shut, I would start getting a sharp itch and pressure just behind my ears. It never failed. Body after body, this feeling was always there. When asked how it feels to see the deceased, I would always reply with the same answer. It's never really bothered me. To me, the soul has left, and it was just an empty vessel. I guess, though, the soul may have left the vessel, but they still seemed to be hanging around for a while. Upon arrival at the funeral home, the deceased would be offloaded and brought into the prep room. If one spirit was noticeable, walking into the prep room was very noticeable. I remember one funeral home had a camera system that I hope had just a malfunction. One of the cameras would static and flash, then turn back on, only to cut out just as you looked at it again. This other one, you would have to walk through the whole building just to turn the lights on. The prep room behind you the whole way. This building always had a habit of having the doors open behind you once you had went through them. Doing this job was, well, interesting. I'm not sure how to really express how overbearing the atmosphere was of the funeral homes at 2 in the morning. But if you want a creepy time, go hang out in the prep room during the witching hour. I swapped out to work as an on-call pallbearer. Seems I just cannot escape the dead.
I'm new to Reddit, but I'm pretty sure that my story fits in best on this page. Sorry if I made any mistakes. I've never made a post on here before. This happened to me and my friends 20 years ago. I'm now a 38-year-old female. I live in Tennessee and we have a place here called Little Egypt. It's a swimming hole. Me and my friends had been there a million times at night. It was the middle of summer and the county fair was in town. Me, my twin sister, and 2 of our friends had gone and hung out like teenagers do. We had run into our mum, stepdad, and little sister while we were at the fair, and told our mum that we were going to Little Egypt to goof off, as we had done a lot that summer. I remember she specifically told me and my twin sister not to go down there that late because anything could happen. We were 18 at the time, and of course you don't listen to your parents much at that age. We told her she was crazy. Nothing would happen to us. We waited till around midnight and decided to go to the swimming hole. It was me and my friend Lisa in one car, and my twin sister and our friend Heather in another car. Now when you get to the swimming hole, it's out in the woods probably about 10 minutes from any civilization, and nowhere to turn around unless you go up on the road. We pull in and get out of our cars. We're still standing pretty close to the cars because we hadn't gotten our flashlights and stuff we were going to take with us out yet. I start to walk towards the car my twin sister and I were standing at, and all of a sudden we hear some sticks breaking. I look at my sister and whisper, "Did you hear that?" She whispers back, "Yes, maybe it was Lisa messing with us." We tell Lisa to quit trying to scare us, that it isn't funny. She says, "I didn't do anything." Then all of a sudden, you can hear a lot of sticks breaking. My sister and Heather jump back in their car. I run to Lisa's car. We barely jump in her car in time. She has automatic seat belts. It nearly broke my shoulder getting in so fast. I don't know how we got the cars turned around in that little space we had, but we did. There were 6 guys dressed in black, head to toe, with masks on, that jumped out of the woods, right where we were parked, with baseball bats, chasing after us. About 3 days later, we went back down there and there was police crime tape everywhere and some other people were there. We asked what happened and they said some guy had gotten beaten to death 3 nights ago. The same night the 6 guys had jumped out on us. Thank God we got away that night, but my heart breaks for the guy that lost his life that night. We did call the cops that night. They told us it was probably just some young kids messing with us. A commenter was saying, "Oh, you didn't call the cops, it's your fault someone died." Like I told him I just hadn't put every single detail in there. But to the 6 guys that jumped out of the woods on us, let's not meet again.
This happened when I was 7 or 8 years old. I'm not sure if this is relevant, but my family was living in a historical part of Pasadena. There was the main house by the road, and a smaller, white, sort of game room a little further back in the yard. It had 2 small rooms and a bathroom in it. We had lived there for at least 2 years total. One afternoon, my parents had gone grocery shopping and left my older sister to look after me. I had stepped outside in the backyard since it was overcast and there was a small drizzle. It was early fall, and it was my kind of weather. I was enjoying the slight breeze and lifted my face toward the sky for the tiny flecks of water to fall on my upturned face. I had stayed like that for a while before I heard a voice in my ear. It was scraggly sounding and wispy. It said, "Jenemy." I froze and opened my eyes to only see the gray sky above me. The same voice and word came again, only more aggressive. "Jenemy." I whipped my head around, but was alone. No one was in either of the neighboring yards. My sister hadn't come outside. I looked towards the White House. No one. I heard slight voices from the neighbor's front yard and walked some distance to see if maybe I heard them. There was only a small group of boys that made up my neighbor's kids' friends. I suspected them, but they were making too much noise and were too far away and into their own thing to want to scare a kid they hardly knew. I think my young brain was looking for a logical explanation since I had never had any type of paranormal experience before. It was when I was done looking for a physical person that I realized the voice I had heard didn't belong to a person. At least not a living one. I backed up slowly to the back door, heart hammering, and quickly went inside and locked the door. It was a cozy house, and my sister was doing her own thing. I was still unsettled, though, and didn't want to tell anyone but my mother. I couldn't wait until my parents came back home. They got home later than I liked, and my anxiety was growing. I only knew I had to let my mom know as soon as she came home. She had told us some paranormal stories before, but I wasn't really too convinced that they were true. I couldn't wait for them to finish unloading the car and told my mom what I had experienced as they were carrying in groceries. I'm happy she took me seriously, and she called my aunt about the word I had heard. My aunt said it meant, God is dead. Now that I am older, I'm sure that word doesn't mean what my aunt had said. My mother did say that my aunt practiced witchcraft and worshipped the devil, so maybe she was trying to push her own agenda. Nonetheless, being a kid and hearing that made the experience even more terrifying. It's been at least 20 years since it happened. I didn't hear another voice while living there. I once found out what the word meant, but I've forgotten its sense. I can only suspect that whatever entity spoke to me was saying something against God, since it probably thought I was worshipping God at that time. I'm not too sure what to make of the experience. Just the usual reaction is a funny laugh when I mention the name. People always think it's Jiminy Cricket. I'm sure it wasn't that, but maybe my spelling wasn't great when I wrote it down for my mom. I thought I would share my experience and thought online would be a good place to post. Maybe others have had similar experiences.
So this happened probably around 10 or 11 years ago when I was 15 or 16. For a little backstory, the legal drinking age in my country is 18, so if you want alcohol and don't have a fake ID or a parent to buy you some, then you had to wait outside of a liquor store until someone came by who agreed to go in and purchase the alcohol for you. So we waited around, found someone who was willing to go in and buy some. I got him to purchase a few bottles of vodka for me and a few friends, 2 of which I was with, and the others were meeting after we had done this. Now it was around 6 p.m., and we decided it was too much of a risk to decant our vodka in less suspicious bottles in the middle of the street as it was very busy. So we did what we would usually do in this situation and found a nearby food place to quickly run in and use the bathrooms to decant our alcohol. This time, we chose to do this in a nearby McDonald's, so we go into McDonald's and head straight for the bathrooms as we had done a million times before. As we go into the bathroom, me and my other 2 friends, we'll call them Harriet and Kara, all occupy one cubicle to get the job done. As I had previously mentioned, we had done this lots of times before and usually opted to come to this McDonald's as it was usually busy, which meant no one paid attention to 3 teenagers. We were all there doing our thing when I could suddenly hear a lot of shifting moving from above us. I figured it was probably the air conditioning and opted not to tell my friends as I thought that it might freak them out. We get the job done, and as we're about to leave the cubicle, we hear a giggle and then someone saying, "Where are you girls going?" I thought it may have been a female at the time. I look up and see a forehead and the eyes of a male who looked to be in his 30s, just staring out from underneath a tile in the ceiling that he had slightly lifted. We were all in shock, just staring at the guy who proceeded to giggle down at us and asked for our names and where we were going and if he could come. We were all in shock because, let's be honest, who really expects there to be some random guy in the ceiling of a McDonald's? Being a teenager who thought I was untouchable, proceeded to tell the guy he was a pervert and to fuck right off. The guy seemed to enjoy this and giggled a little more, shifting around in the ceiling and never taking his eyes off of us. Now I should probably mention that along with pouring our drinks into other bottles, we also pre-rolled a few joints, so we were beyond terrified to alert anyone at this point, as we were young and terrified of our parents finding out. The guy still staring at us proceeds to ask us questions like, "What age are you guys? Where do you live? Can I have some of your drink and a smoke of that weed?" Still while twitching and fidgeting overhead. He then starts to lift the tile and asks if we were stuck in the cubicle. And as we're stuck in a cubicle with this guy above us, we knew the only way he had to get down was to come down directly on top of us, so we noped out at that point. We went outside and discussed what we were going to do. I decided to go back in and alert someone, as it's a very busy McDonald's, and I knew that there would probably be a woman and children in and out of the toilet until closing time. I didn't want to risk that creep standing up there and spying on them, especially since I knew that he was there and had witnessed this behavior firsthand. I walk into the McDonald's and tell a member of the staff that I had been in the toilet for a long time while taking a phone call. I know it was a bad lie, but my 16-year-old brain was too scared to tell the truth just in case they alerted the police. And that's when the guy had appeared, and to my shock, they were completely unsurprised. They were just pissed off more than anything. I saw a few male members start to enter the toilet. I figured they could handle it, so I went on my way. We still went to that McDonald's, but never encountered that ceiling guy again. We're not even sure if the guy got caught, as we didn't hear anything about it afterwards. So to the creepy guy in the ceiling watching the girls' bathroom with a bird's eye view, let's not meet ever again.
I have a tale from a long time ago I thought I would share. I think it belongs here. I hope I don't bore you. I am now a 72-year-old man. This happened a long time ago, but I remember it so well. The background was a series of events that placed me in a mountain cabin outside of Frederick, Maryland, circa 1969 or 1970. I just say my life at the time was in disarray. I had dropped out of college, my father had died very badly, and I was alienated. I needed to get my mind right. The opportunity to move to an isolated cabin to live in contemplation and solitude was welcome. I had some inheritance money to pay for it. To the best of my memory, I was there 8 to 9 months. No TV, but books and radio. I had a library card and can't remember if I had a phone. The story begins when, a month into my stay, a female beagle showed up at my door. She was a lost dog, and I took her in. Never could train her to do anything, but I fed her, and she was a sweet, if not the brightest, dog. A few months in, I began to feel a presence around the isolated cabin. Hard to describe, but I felt like someone was watching. On many occasions, I thought someone might even be looking in my cabin window, watching us. The next phase was the shadowing or following. I knew the folks a half mile down the lane woods all around, and would sometimes visit them at night. Something was waiting for me, and followed closely in the woods beside me in the darkness. You could hear it easily. Footsteps in the woods, and it picked up its pace as I did. This not only happened to me, but to my younger brother who visited, and to friends, and it spooked them big time. At night, it was out there, around the cabin. Here is the funny thing, I was never afraid, never felt threatened. Not at all, at least early on. There was no feeling of malevolence. I spent a good bit of time wandering the vast areas of woodlands around me. There was a state park just up the hill, and the Frederick Municipal Forest went on for mile after mile. The whole of western Maryland was much more country than it is now. None of the development had set in yet. In our hikes, the dog and I, we came across evidence of campsites, recent ones, in the woods. Traces of fires, old abandoned buildings that had corners that gave shelter and looked slept in, garbage, food and drink, paper, what have you. Perhaps hunters, but much of it did not have the organized feel you would get from experienced hunters. The last month of my stay there was when things intensified. Maybe he sensed I was preparing to leave. In the mornings, I would find small dead animals at the bottom of my front porch steps. The cabin had a small front porch, screened with a light door and 4 wooden steps to the ground. A spotlight would illuminate the long front yard, with woods close by either side. Dead animals began to appear at the bottom of the steps many mornings. I remember small birds, then a squirrel, a rabbit, even a weasel one day. Like they were offerings. I had to grab them up before the dog ate them. This went on almost daily for several weeks. One night, very late, I was awoken by some sound. I lay in bed and heard something from the porch. I hopped up and hit the lights and saw that hound dog, who never learned to sit or stay, standing at the front door, in a perfect point position. She was shaking in fear. She never barked. I heard the door slam and footsteps down the steps. I hit the spotlight but saw nothing. I went out. He had been on the porch at my front door, maybe trying to enter. After that I stayed in at night, more and more. The animal offerings got bigger and bigger. Larger birds, a possum, a woodchuck. It was not funny. The final 2 gifts were legs from either horses or cows. Big and bloody. One was skinned, holy shit. The second to last day, the dog left me. I could hear her in the woods howling on a trail, following a scent. I looked for her in every way I could, came up in following weeks, but to no avail. She left as she came. I moved back to the Maryland suburbs of DC, got an apartment with a friend, got a job, and moved on with my life. One day not long after I picked up the Washington Post, there was an article about recent encounters with the Sykesville Monster. It described a tall, yeti-like creature, fur-covered, on 2 legs that would pick out a family or person and give them attention. I wasn't the only one. That attention described in the article was exactly what happened to me. Following you at night, looking inside the house, gifts, and so on. I was shocked. If I had turned on the spotlight and seen a Bigfoot or Yeti, I might still be running. But I think I know who it was. Sykesville, Maryland was the location of the Springfield Hospital Center, a large psychiatric hospital. It was 20 miles or so east of Frederick. Back then, many folks knew how to live in the woods. They grew up that way, country folks. I think the monster was an escaped patient, or just a free schizophrenic who lived outside. This is like all the homeless you see in cities now. Probably off his meds, but somehow functional and lonely. He would pick people or families to adopt. The camps in the woods could have been him. Nothing to do, he would make mischief. I think he liked me but sensed I was leaving. I can't prove any of this, just my theory. My monster wasn't very much of that time and place, and his behavior was what I noticed in nearly every case then. I do not think he could have survived until the 1980s. The institutionalization of mental hospitals threw the mentally ill out into the streets and took away the shelter of hospitals. Unprotected, the mentally ill die. Thank you.
This is about my time in the US military. The Army to be exact. I will not disclose my unit or where I was stationed. In respects to ComSec. That's communication security for those of you who don't know. I could say I was in Korea at the time. A place bursting with life and excitement. Culture alone is awe-inspiring. Majority of the older population loves Americans, for obvious reasons. This story isn't about the good times I've had there. No. This is about a night I was on AHA guard. An AHA is an ammo holding area, generally for training purposes as Korea is no longer a live combat zone. At the time this took place there were 3 of us, and names will be altered for safety reasons. Sergeant Monroe, Private Jeffrey, and I, Private Chrono. I was driving the Humvee at the time to relinquish the current guard to their duties. It's only a 24-hour duty, so it's not like we had to stay out there for several weeks or anything. As we pull up to the gate at the entrance to the AHA at 0300 hours, just 3 hours prior for our shift, so we can get briefing and secure the location. Yes, it was already secured from the prior guards there, but it's standard procedure in an infantryman, as an infantryman. And, well, the military altogether. Redundancy and repetition. For those who have served, you'll understand. Once we made our rounds securing the area, we went back to the guard shack. I was voluntold I was going to be on the first shift guard, while Sergeant Monroe and Private Jeffrey sat back at the warm guard shack, playing cards most of the time. We broke up our shifts into 4-8-8-4, so I had the shorter shifts, but I also had to go out there twice. It never bothered me though. I preferred the first and last shifts anyways. So let's start with my first shift. I donned my battle garb, grabbed my rifle, and I started walking the perimeter first. The entire AHA wasn't very big, but when you're on the side of a mountain with a dense forest, it could be a bit of a bitch to make your way around. It took about an hour to make it around the AHA. Nothing too exciting. Spotted a few deer. Now those fuckers are creepy enough. If you haven't seen a Korean deer, Google it. As I make my way back inside the gate to start checking the locks and all the containment units, I heard the foghorn. It would blast in sequence to let everyone know that there was a storm or something coming. Different sequences tell you different things. This time, however, it was just going. One large bellow of the horn and it stopped. No clue what that was supposed to mean. I figured I would check in with Sergeant Monroe after my shift to see if he knew anything. After all the locks were checked, I made my way to our tower. For a better understanding, the guard shack at the end is at the entrance of the AHA. The tower is in the opposite corner across the area. It's about 30 feet tall, 44 foot by 4 foot wide. It's enough space for 2 men and their battle rattle. I bust open my breakfast MRE and I stare out into the dense forest. 3 hours into my shift, I radio into the shack to make sure Private Jeffrey was awake to cover down on my position. And that's when I saw it. A thick, dense fog began rolling in over the hillside. It was like a tsunami crashing into the trees. Everything disappeared behind it. It came in so fast. Now pulling security is going to be a pain in the ass. Only 15 minutes left until Private Jeffrey starts his patrol. I'll need a radio in to let him know. 1000 rolls around and I can hear Private Jeffrey exit the shack. Just madder than hell, cussing up a storm. He began his patrol around the perimeter. I remember I told you about the redundancy and repetition. As he came around to where the tower was, which is also the steeper part of the hillside, I can hear him falling and cussing and all that good stuff, but I couldn't see him. The fog had settled in and it was going to mean a long shift for him. Private Jeffrey yelled up as he approached the tower. "Get your ass down here!" As I started to gather my things and make my descent, the foghorn blasted again. One long blare. Day late and dollar short, I thought. The fog was already here. I made my way down to brief Private Jeffrey what I saw, which was not a damn thing. He began to make his way up. He looked almost frightened climbing the ladder. Thought he was just afraid of heights. I know that I was wrong. On my way back to the shack, take off my gear when Sergeant Monroe wanted to play some cards. He apparently was bored and didn't want to sleep. That asshole decided to keep me up the entire shift. So he played a few rounds of cards, but every now and then he would glance out the shack window. I asked if something was wrong, but he just kind of shook his head. He seemed very uneasy, almost scared. So I kind of did the dumb private thing and got loud at an NCO. That's a non-commissioned officer. "What the hell is the problem, Sergeant?" He looked at me like he was about to rip my head off and shit down my neck. Honestly, I've never been more afraid of the man. He leaned in and told me to keep my mouth fucking shut about this. He told me that those foghorns have a distinct code. One solid blare is to commemorate the Korean War, and the soldiers lost both American and South Korean. He also said that it was to commemorate the late wife of the Korean general. She had lost her husband during the war, and before this post was a post, it was a small village that was home to the battleground he had fought and died in. The second horn is to welcome her return. He said he had seen her once, back when he was a private. He said all you could hear was crying. He said that it scared the shit out of him. Kinda went quiet after that, and he continued to play cards until his timer went off for his shift. He shot me a look like "don't say a fucking word" type of look. I never did tell Private Jeffrey. Probably still won't. Sergeant Monroe donned his kit and was headed out for his patrol. I had an hour to myself until Private Jeffrey shows up. After getting all that slapped on me, I had a newfound respect for the man, but god damn it scared the shit out of me. I had the last shift after all, and it was going to suck. I pulled out my last MRE and began warming it up. This one had Reese's Pieces in it. Fucking score! I usually save all the candy from MREs for bartering later, but anyways, I'm getting off track. After I finished my meal, ready to eat, I decided it was time to get some rest before my next shift. Last thing I want is patrol that's dead-ass tired. Pull up my rucksack that had my pad and sleeping bag, and I lay out for just right next to the door so I can get out to relieve Sergeant Monroe once he radios in. He was the only one smart enough to bring a timer. The radio made a weird hiss noise and then crackled. Must have been Sergeant Monroe. I rushed to get ready and head out for my patrol around the perimeter. Fucking hate that part. It's worse with the fog. I donned my gear and grabbed my rifle and headed out again. Now this last shift wouldn't have been so bad if Sergeant Monroe didn't drop such a fucking bombshell on me. Now I gotta watch out for fucking ghosts? Shit. This is going to be a long shift, I thought. I started on my patrol taking the same path as I did last time. The fog had gotten so thick now, it's smarter to do it that way. As I traverse the shit terrain, the horn goes off again. Scared the shit out of me. Damn near literally. I fell and busted my ass on a stump, and as I when I went to regain my composure, I heard a faint wailing in the distance. First thing that came to mind was that woman. I booked it around the perimeter as fast as I could, but the wailing grew louder, as if it were following me. It got to the point where I felt like it was on top of me. I couldn't see shit. Once I made it back to the gate, I rushed over to the tower, leaving behind all the locks. I yelled for Sergeant Monroe, and he started climbing down. The only thing he said to me when he got down was, "You heard it too, huh? Welcome to the club."
The Woods of Somerset, Kentucky by U/Scary Stormy. How many of you have an event from your past that you can't ever forget? Something that terrified you to the point of pure primal fear. But it's so far-fetched and impossible that you begin questioning your mind's credibility. For me, that event happened 10 years ago, in the woods of Somerset, Kentucky. I was about 15 when these events took place. I'm not gonna lie, I consumed a lot of horror media growing up. I would stay up all night watching Nightmare on Elm Street. Yeah, even the shitty last 3 movies. Yes, they sucked, don't at me. I absolutely adored all types of horror media, and so did my friends. One type of horror that always struck a chord with us were these investigation shows. Ghost Hunters, Destination Truth, Scariest Places on Earth, all that stuff. I remember my friend Mark's dad was real big into paranormal investigation, and that kind of fueled the flames. We all wanted to grow up and explore the world, investigating all kinds of abandoned buildings, hiding unknown creatures or entities. We would be better than all of those shows because unlike them, when shit hit the fan, we'd stand our ground and take whatever came our way. But the worldwide adventure would have to be put on hold considering, we were all literal children. That never broke our resolve, though. Now, Mark's dad had the works. EMF detectors, night vision cameras with thermal readings, high-end audio recorders, all of it. He also had several firearms. Not like a crazy amount, but enough for personal protection and home defense. We all referred to Mark's dad as like the Batman of ghost hunting because he always seemed to have the right tool for every situation. He even had one of the magazines for his pistol loaded with silver bullets. Just in case, he told us. He would take us out along a lot of his investigations to local cemeteries and places with haunted reputation. We all felt like we were really doing it. This was just a stepping stone of our lives to become the adventure book we all thought it was going to be. Sorry for all the background for the event, but I just want you all to understand the mindset we were all in to get us to make the stupid choices that we did. Now, Mark's place was the place to be back then. We would spend days at this place, hanging out, playing games, and watching TV to our heart's desire. One of the weekends, we had the house to ourselves, and it was great. It was Mark, Chuck, Danny, Brendan, and myself. We were trying to kill as much time as we could, waiting for the night to fall. You see, one of the most beautiful things about Somerset were the woods. Somerset did have a little center town where it faked a sense of being an actual city, but once you got about 2 miles worth of city, all of a sudden you dropped off the face of the earth. Somerset is about 11 square miles large, and I guarantee you that most of it is woods. Some of it's Lake Cumberland, but most of it's woods. When we were at Mark's place, we were about 20 minutes from the next house. Like I said, dropped off the face of the world. And on that night, 10 years ago, the night finally fell over Somerset. This was finally our time. Our stupid, edgy 15-year-old time. You see, we had been waiting for night to come because we were going to explore the woods out behind Mark's house. We were all armed with our flashlights, water bottles, and all of us had knives to some capacity. Mark also had brought some of his guns, just in case. He had a 12-gauge pump shotgun. It maybe had like 6 shells in the gun at best. Chuck had a .22 rifle that had a very wimpy single-round capacity. And I had a .22 6-shot revolver. In Somerset, being in the backwoods town that it wasn't uncommon to see someone toting around firearms all over the place. Now, it wasn't super common to have 15-year-olds carrying guns, but it would happen from time to time. Plus, we were on private property, so in our minds, it was okay. Like I said, we were stupid kids. Once we were all geared up, it was time for our adventure. And as soon as we entered those woods, there was this uneasy tension in the air. The crickets and the other wildlife in the area sounded active, which was a good sign. We weren't sure just as yet as to what it was that made us feel off, but we would soon find out. We were about 15 minutes into the woods when we found the bridge. This bridge was an old rickety wooden thing that went across a steep trench that was probably about 15 feet deep that went on for at least 50 to 70 feet before twisting around the hills out of sight. Not exactly a canyon, but it was definitely not something I wanted to go down into. If I did, it would be a pain in the ass to get back up. It didn't really seem like an easy way to get back. We decided to take a quick break while we were there. We set up a small perimeter with a lantern from our pack. We really didn't have any plan on just how long we were going to be out there, so we decided to set up a small campfire and just hang out until it's time to continue. Chuck, Danny, Mark, and Brendan were relaxing and shooting the shit with each other, so I decided to keep watch. I was walking around the perimeter we had set up, shining my flashlight around the woods surrounding us. As I was walking, I noticed something strange. I heard the crunching of leaves under my feet. And I'm sure someone would say, so what? But that's just it. That's all I heard. Other than the few words here and there from my friends, I heard nothing else. The woods were dead silent. And as soon as I noticed the silence, I drew the revolver from its holster. Whatever good the .22 was going to do to what I thought was nearby. I continued to shine my flashlight around, trying to remain calm, but then the beam shined onto something just at the edge of the hill. Something just barely peeking over the edge of the trench. Something that I couldn't quite make out with just the light. But after a few moments of adjusting, I could finally make out what it was. But I wished that I hadn't. The thing's white skin was reflecting the beam from the flashlight, but I could make out a vaguely human-shaped head. Its dark eyes seemed to absorb the light, leaving just soulless voids staring daggers at me. I was frozen in place, locked in eye contact with whatever this thing was. Then its head disappeared back into the trench. As soon as I was released from its gaze, I turned back to my friends and tried as quietly as I could to get their attention, but they didn't seem to notice. They were too enveloped in their conversation, probably about something stupid as usual. So after mustering as much as I could, I called out, "Hey! Hey! Hey!" The crack of my voice echoed through the now silent woods. They all whipped their heads back at me, startled at the sudden sound. After a moment, I finally recollected myself and slowly but frantically pointed out at the trench where I saw the thing. "There's something in the ditch," I barely forced out. And with that, the rest of my friends quickly got up and drew the weapons they had. All of us frantically searching at the edge of the ditch with our guns trained on the spots. After a few moments, our desperate searching, we finally noticed the thing peek up again. About 10 feet closer than it had previously been. It was peeking just slightly more than it had been previously. My friends, now caught in the same trance as its voids of eyes, stared quickly, moving from one of us to the other. For a moment, it almost looked like it didn't have a mouth, and then we all saw its tongue come out of a small slit in its face, almost seeming to lick its lips at us. We all stood in the same frozen shock as the thing quickly dipped back down into the trench. And it came back up again, another 10 feet closer. It was coming closer to us. I can't remember who yelled to run, but I remember all of us running like maniacs back towards Mark's house. So much for standing our ground. I found myself close to the front behind Chuck, and we ran for what felt like forever. As we ran for what we believed was our lives, I heard Danny and Brendan screaming. I can't remember what it was that they were saying, but my ears were ringing and my lungs were burning. Eventually, we finally made it back to Mark's house. Seeing that house was the closest feeling to salvation I've ever experienced. We all practically dived into the door, quickly locking it behind us. After we were finally clear, we kept our guns trained on the doors and exits fueled only by adrenaline. It had to have been hours that we all stood with our weapons in our hands, just hoping that the creature wouldn't try to enter the house. Once morning finally came, we were all exhausted. I don't think I was the first person to pass out, but I know that I was the last person to wake up. Everyone else was just sitting quietly in the living room. It took hours before we decided to even talk about what happened. Danny and Brendan explained that as we were running, they could hear heavy steps running behind them. We couldn't rationalize what it was that we saw, so we all decided not to talk about it to anyone else. Again, stupid decision, I know, but we were terrified teenagers. We all decided that we were never going to go into the woods behind Mark's house again. And we stuck to that. We never did go back out into the woods, and I barely went out into the woods anywhere else in that town. And our investigation team plans, unfortunately, fell apart. We all moved to different places later in our lives and slowly grew apart. The only people I really keep in contact with anymore are Chuck and Mark, but I haven't seen either of them in years. There are many things that I question when I look back at that night. What could it have been? Why couldn't we move? Was it just some animal that looked monstrous in the light? The thing that always confuses me is how it moved. It just kept bobbing up and down out of a 15-foot trench. I don't understand how it could have climbed up and down. Unless it was just ducking.
What I'm about to write down next is gonna sound like a joke, but it happened. This isn't that creepy though. Also, I'm Indian, so please don't fuck with me for my mistakes if I make any. Here goes nothing. I live in an apartment with my parents, younger brother, elder cousin, and grandfather. All of these people had gone over for a party, which I couldn't attend because of tuitions. Sucks, I know. For your information, I am a huge WWE fan. So, anyways, I had come up the lift, which was on the far end, and as soon as the door opened, I saw a man at the other far end, probably around 5'10", so just as tall as me. The dude was wearing a mask. Creepy part is that it was one of those devilish goat masks with huge horns. Now, my house is right in the middle of the lobby. I was pretty spooked out by his mask. But hey, it's mandatory to wear a mask, and maybe he thought it looked neat on him. So, no biggie. Shit got fucked up when he tilted his head, and from a back pocket, produced a vicious looking knife. You should all know that we both were at our respective ends of the lobby, and we hadn't moved at all. But my ass was about to move hard. I ran and tried to get to my door before him. But he was surprisingly fast, and he was able to cover a similar distance as me. When I realized that even if I was able to reach first, I would still need time to unlock my door. That's where WWE comes to the save. And as I see him closing in on me, I hit him with a move called a spear, which is basically running into your opponent's belly with your shoulder. He was coming pretty fast towards me, so I took advantage of the speed and crashed him with the spear. I then quickly opened up the door and locked it. I called my dad before the police because I don't know why, but of course by the time he reached, no one was out there. It still terrifies me to think what would have happened to me if I didn't trust a wrestling move with my life. Update. Guys, today my friend who lives in the same building as me just told me that he met the dude. My friend was out camping with his dad and cousin brother. After a week, they came back yesterday, and when they called the lift, the guy was there, same attire, and the man didn't even try to hide the knife. Luckily, my friend's dad is pretty buff, but still, they got the vibes from him. So they left the lift on the next floor itself and took the stairs. The man did not try to rob them and didn't even make eye contact. I am pretty shaken up by this incident because when I saw him for the first time, I did not expect to see him again, especially considering the fact that he was definitely not following me.
Okay, so this was about 2.5 years ago, I think. I've blocked it out because it was honestly very scary for me. My best friend and I were just driving around town around about 11 p.m., just taking random turns with no real destination. We were stopped at a stop sign and waited for a truck to pass so that we could go. It headed the opposite direction from us, and we turned left so that the truck passed and we were behind it. But this is where it all starts, and our anxiety and fear was raised. As we were behind the truck, it pulled off to the right in front of a church. My friend and I continued to drive, thinking nothing of it. The church was on the block with 2 houses right next to it. However, I don't exactly remember for sure. We were about to pass the church when the truck got back onto the road. We thought it was a little weird, but ignored it. We stopped at the next stop sign, then went right. So did the truck. That's when we started to get a weird feeling. At the next stop sign, we went straight. The next block, we turned right and went up the block, only to turn right again. The truck was still right behind us. We drove straight, then drove down the road just before turning right again onto the block that the church was on. We had just passed minutes earlier. He had now taken 3 of the same turns, almost a full circle. So he took one more right to make a circle, and of course, there he was, right behind us. At this point, my friend and I were freaking out. As soon as we passed the church once again, my friend hit the gas. We blew through the stop sign, this time turning left instead of right. We were about 3 blocks from the main road, and we blew every stop sign, as did the truck. Nobody was on the roads at this point in the night. As we finally got to the main road, we didn't stop at the sign and turned left, hitting the gas. We were going 80 miles per hour on a 55 mile per hour road. We looked behind us and there was the truck. Her and I were freaking out at this point, almost in tears. However, this is the part that this is weird to explain. She took a right off onto a road to a small neighborhood, and then we could have turned left or right, but without thinking we hurried and took a left onto a road with about 4 houses on it. But the road we had turned onto continued to loop left, back to the main road. When she took that right, the truck continued to drive on that road. We were almost relieved. Almost. When we realized the road we would take us back to the main road, we stopped. From where we were, if we looked left, we could see the main road across a small field. And lo and behold, we saw the trucks driving slowly up on the main road. We could see the truck pull off the road and shut all of its lights off, and it sat there. It occurred to us that he knew there was only one way out. He was waiting for us to come up that road. We turned off our lights and hurried and turned around and drove straight. We weaved through all the houses and came out of the neighborhood on the other side. This town only has around 2 main roads. It's hard to explain. As we got to the other side, we got on the other main road, heading north. So while he was following us, we were heading south. We eventually got to a local Walmart where her car was parked so we could head to our houses. She always drives my car because I don't like driving. We just cried in my car before we got out and said our goodbyes. I live around half an hour away and she was only 10 minutes from her house. I was so terrified that I would see that truck again. We don't talk about it much. The The fear that we felt was very weird. I haven't felt anything like that since. We don't know why the truck started following us, and we probably never will. But these days we never know what goes through a sick person's head when they see two 16-year-old girls driving around at 11 o'clock at night. So, guy in white truck, let's not meet.
A guy waited and followed me on the tram. This story took place about 2 years ago, when I was 16 and 5'6", who either looked like a 12-year-old boy or a 16-year-old tomboy, depending on the person. At the time as well, I suffered with really bad anxiety, and you could definitely see it in my body language. I was definitely an easy target for predators. So I was a 16-year-old kid just picking up hardbacks for my last year in school. After I was done shopping, I decided to get a tram back to my dad's workplace, and then he would take me home. It was a Sunday morning, pretty chilly, and it definitely had an uneasy feel. I hated going into town alone, but no one else was available to join me, so I sucked it up and did the deed. The trams were new at the time, and I'd only taken them 2 or 3 times, so I was definitely hypervigilant on them, especially since I suffer with anxiety. I didn't want to miss my stop, and I didn't want anything weird to happen as the tram was notorious for weird people. I walked to my tram stop and waited. The next tram was coming soon, but there is a guy there making me incredibly uneasy. I hate assuming the worst of people, but this man was making me so uncomfortable. Nothing in particular was off about him. He looked a bit scruffy, but not a predator. So I decided to walk away from the stop for a bit, and wait for the tram coming to pass, then return and get the next one after. They come often enough, and this dude was giving me the creeps. I walk away for a bit, take a nice relaxing stroll to calm myself down, and return to the stop. He's still there. When I left, he definitely watched me leave and waited for me to return. Now, at the time, I was doubting myself. I was telling myself that I'm being irrational. Something like a creepy dude following me couldn't happen to me, surely. Wrong. We got on the tram. My tram takes about 5 stops to my dad's workplace. I walked down the tram a bit. The man was still in my eye line and I was in his. Now, my dad's workplace is about a 5-minute stroll from my tram stop, but it is a walk down to a quiet area. An area that someone could easily assault you or take you, and not many would take notice, especially on a Sunday morning. Each stop I'm praying this guy gets off the tram, but he doesn't. My anxiety has hit the roof, and although the tram stop is only 5 minutes, I call my dad to pick me up right outside the station. My dad surprisingly obliges. I think he could tell something was off with me. So all I have to do is walk out of the train station and make it to the car. I still hope that this guy would not get off at my station and would go to the next one instead. It came to my stop. I got off, and of course Mr. Creepy got off too. No one else got off but us two. Fuck. The guy looks at me and I look at him. We make eye contact. I could tell he was planning on walking in my direction and following me out. I can see him panic a little, and he walks in the opposite direction of me. Now the chilling part about this is, this station has only one exit. This man turns around and walks onto the tracks of the tram and just wanders off. I didn't stay too long to see if he would come back, and I sped towards my dad's car. When I got into my dad's car, I double-checked with him that there is only one exit to the station, as the tram is only new, and I was pretty unfamiliar with it. He says yes, there is only one exit and I'm covered in goosebumps. This man waited for me to get onto the tram, even though he knew he could have taken an earlier one, followed me to the station, and decided to last minute abort the mission. I have tried to rationally explain this to myself. Maybe he wasn't following me and he was just a weird dude. But why did his presence make me so uneasy that I decided to walk away and wait for the next tram? Why did he wait for the next tram when he could have gotten an earlier one? What are the chances of the man getting off at the same stop as me? Why did he not use the exit and walk onto the tracks instead? It's not like I gave him a death stare. We just made eye contact when we got off the tram. And I was a 5'6", 16-year-old kid. Definitely not intimidating. All I know from this experience is that I was just glad my dad picked me up from outside the station. And I never want to experience the feeling of being followed again. So, to the weird dude who followed me on the tram, let's not meet again.
I don't even know if this is okay to post here, but after 2 years, I finally feel like I can talk about it. This is a bit of a wild one, but unfortunately, 100% true. In 2018, I ended up in a small town that didn't have very much in it and was pretty separated from everything, with a friend I hadn't seen in about 11 years. I was staying at my friend's parents' house for a while I was there, which was fine of course. Well, until it wasn't. I woke up in the morning, and my friend had gone to work, leaving me with my friend's parents for the day. I sat with them and talked for a while before they offered me some water. I accepted, and they poured it from a jug. City water is so bad for you, so I get well water from my sister. All was good, but I found the water a bit odd. I'm from the big city, and I'm not really exposed to well water, so I assumed it was the difference. I should mention that I spend my time watching people and their body language in conversations because I find it interesting. And over time, I noticed a little bit of a shift. My friend's parents started saying things like, "The world is a cruel place for beautiful people like you, but we won't ever be." And talking about how they'll always be there for me, how they'll keep me safe, how they hope I spend a lot of time there. I also realized that these statements were lining up when I was taking sips of water. I told myself I was being paranoid, and my friend's parents were insisting I drink the water while talking because they were being a parent, fretting over health and stuff. That's why they wanted me to drink the water from the well, you know? I did get a weird feeling from what I assumed was anxiety about a new place. So when my friend's parents was gone to do something, I poured it out, got a new glass, and refilled it with tap water, and then sent back in my spot. This water was used for everything throughout the day. Coffee, well water, cooking, steaming food cooked for me, well water. The conversation kept bouncing back to those statements while I ate and such. But again, just nerves. Right? Later in the evening, they started talking about other things. Like how the government wanted their secrets, because they found a way to cure terminal illnesses. And then, it abruptly switched to how their ex-partner stole their children by using chemical hypnosis to poison them against their will. Okay, this was getting strange. So I contacted my parents and asked if they switched my travel ticket to ASAP. Because my bad feeling was getting worse, I left my phone unattended while I washed my hair, and then my friend came home. I felt better afterwards and sat in the kitchen with them, feeling kind of ridiculous for being nervous about well water and uncommon ideas, until parent filled friend's water bottle with tap water. That was it for me. I said I was tired and locked myself in the bathroom until the morning, when I walked into the kitchen and told them I was leaving in 3 hours because of a family emergency. I was paranoid for days. I actually have witnesses to the fact that every time I talked about it, my phone would ring with the number from the area code. The first time was a coincidence. The next 3 weren't. I also got a text from a number. I've never seen that said, "Hey Oakley, do you have time to chat?" I asked who it was, and they immediately said they had the wrong number. Except my name isn't common, and the spelling is even less so. I handed my company the phone, and they told me I needed to talk to someone about what was happening, because this wasn't normal. I saw my psychologist a few days later, and her exact words were, "Did you get a blood test when you got back? You should have gotten a blood test." She told me the behavior lines up with drugging someone. I was to monitor my mental health for worsening paranoia or psychosis, and go to a hospital if anything out of the ordinary happened, because it was way too late for any info to come up. I had tech people run diagnostics on my phone, and there were 2 programs I definitely never downloaded. So we fully factory reset my device, and I changed my number. This is even more unsettling, because I run virus scans on my devices unnecessarily often, and nothing came up before they did some digging. I haven't heard from my friend since, and I haven't reached out. I'm healthy and sober with my mental health under control, but this still makes me so nervous to talk about. This is actually the first time I've ever talked about it openly on the internet, and I'm definitely nervous something will happen. But I've moved twice, and changed all of my accounts, gotten a new phone, and made sure all my passwords were secure. And to my friend's parents, I truly hope you get some help, because what you tried to do to me will forever haunt me, as long as I live.
An Open Mind, The Fate of Peter Curtin. Normally, I fabricate a tale, twist the imagination. This is not one of those tales. This is true. Bisected, spinning, mummified, not words that would typically be attributed to a head. The dim light forced shadows into the cavities, increasing the tones of brown and yellow, the dried leather of a tongue still looking wetly pink, the whole thing mounted on what looked like an oversized fishing treble hook. The overall appearance was simply monstrous. A young family picked its way through the museum nestled in the Wisconsin Dales, reviews from the website calling it delightfully creepy. Through the camp schlock horror exhibits is this monstrous lump of flesh, empty sockets, balefully seeing its plexiglass too. No words or babble of excitement any more. All 4 drew in breath, not releasing it, pausing a beat. The father, horrified, whisked the children away, while drawn to the exhibit, unable to tear his eyes away from it until its view was completely obscured. The empty mind of the man hollowed and exposed. Doctors performed this procedure in Germany in 1931, bisecting the head, laterally cleaving the skull from crown to neck. The brains measured and weighed, the spaces searched and scoured, looking and prodding. For the sake of the macabre, the head is mummified, the face screaming like a snake about to strike hapless prey, barbaric and horrific. Maybe a precursor to the horrors to come. Who was this poor unfortunate? What were they looking for? No one ever reads the little card explaining about the man. They cannot bring themselves to turn away from the leathery, grinning memento mori. The card reads thusly: Peter Curtin, the Dusseldorf Vampire. Believe it or not, beheaded murderer Peter Curtin had his head bisected and mummified in an attempt by scientists to understand the workings of his mind. Therefore, his head was bisected to study his brain and the skull's internal cavities. One lucky victim described him as a simple and pleasant-looking man, married happily to a woman he was devoted to. There was that tingle and compulsion, the need to dominate and do things to anyone that fell in his grasp, and in his grasp things were opened to him that we cannot really understand. The victims ranged from children to adults, even branching to the assault of animals. He was savage and brutal, and a pleasant-looking man, someone who looked normal and fine, someone who would, well, do something unpleasant at the death of those of his victims. I could tell you of Christine or Rudolph, I could, but the response of those he recounted his exploits to at the trial will suffice. They were sickened and horrified. They learned that exsanguination was enough to bring him to climax, that he drank blood from the throats of his victims. The nature of these crimes was one for the insane, for a Freudian nightmare, a Lovecraftian inmate of insanity. Renowned psychologist Dr. Berg and other leading authorities from Germany pronounced finally the result of their findings into this maniac. He was legally sane and could control his actions. He could control his actions. He did not. His final words were one that chilled all those who heard it. Tell me, after my head is chopped off, will I still be able to hear, at least for a moment, the sound of my own blood gushing from the stump of my neck? That would be the greatest pleasure to end all pleasures. Though horrific, there is more to the head that is macabre and strange, calmly spinning, looking never to see anything. The head was normal, the brain normal, the cavities normal. So we forget, we let history wash away the horror. We wait to look, watching, knowing it happens to others in books and films and newspapers. Just ask yourselves this: do you really know a person? Let me answer for you. Monsters are conquerable and defeated by a hero. Monsters are not real. Even through dead eyes with the mind open for all to see, we still cannot find the thing that makes us evil. This thing is missing, ethereal, untraceable. The reason he killed was pleasure. We search for meaning rather than admitting a fundamental truth. Lust maud, murder for pleasure. It is a capacity we all have. That man you saw a while ago, didn't he look very pleasant and completely normal?
I tried confronting a clown. I don't know what I was thinking. It seemed like an innocuous idea. Find one of the clowns, corner it, and find out why they are doing all of this. I would become a media sensation. My findings might have led to blowing the entire clown sensation wide open, all because of my bravery. I'd be a hero. At first, my town seemed to be sacred land that no clown dare touch. It was a God-fearing blue-collar town where everyone knew their neighbors and the postman could eat for an entire week, thanks to the housewives and their generosity. There was one school, a Baptist-run institution, that surprisingly focused more on education than religion. Everyone who has ever lived in the town went to that school, just like everyone here got their first job at a window factory. It was simply how things were. Some call it right. We called it home. Sure, there was crime. Like one time, for example, the little Dax Tarly's oldest boy lashed out and broke 3 windows at the church. It was all over the news and the papers. People would gossip, of course. However, no one chastised him for his actions. Instead, Everyone was supportive and got him the help he needed. I'm not trying to brag. This was just a genuinely pleasant and nurturing community. When the news broke that a clown was seen sitting on the steps of the school the other night, it sent ripple throughout the calm town. Everyone had been following the stories, yet no one was concerned of seeing them there. Why would we be? We all knew it was a prank, albeit a stupid one, that would fade away into obscurity. It was chalked up to the dexterity boy lashing out again until the next sighting. And the next, then another, then 2 clowns together. It wasn't until a dog was found mutilated in the middle of the town center that the population collectively began to panic. Curfews were enforced, shops closed early, school and church service was reduced to twice a week. Had someone passed through after dusk, they would have found a ghost town. Fear was running the town now. I wanted it to stop. My plan was simple. Every night since the first incident, the clowns have been seen at the school grounds or the church grounds. All I would need to do is stay out of sight of the sheriff while I waited to see a clown. Then, simply run up on it and find out what the hell they are doing in this town. Easy. Darkness had finally fallen that night. I made a decision to act. I've never believed in guns, nor taking a weapon to an unarmed fight, but I have to admit, the hysteria was beginning to grate on me at that point. I went out with a wooden Louisville slugger and a flashlight. It was slightly after 10 p.m. and most of the residents were already sleeping in hopes of seeing daylight sooner. That made it easy for me to avoid the sheriff, as I was able to cut through backyards and hide in driveways when the patrol cars got too close. This was a small town. On a regular night, I could walk to the school in less than 10 minutes, but law enforcement wasn't taking any chances. It took me almost an hour to reach the school, and when I did, I was upset. I was really upset to see nothing waiting for me. Nothing. I posted up in a nearby tree that had a clear view of the front of the building and got comfortable. Something in my gut told me I was going to have a long wait ahead of me. I wish I could say that a few hours into my shift, a clown came, and I was able to get my answers. I really do. But I fell asleep. I woke up on the lawn under the tree to blinding daylight and a gun in my face. The officer was stern and visibly shaken, but nice enough to me. At the station, he gave me coffee and a nice selection of pastries and fruits to choose from for breakfast. In other cities, this might be seen as them buttering up a suspect to get them to talk. But not here. This was Southern hospitality at its finest. We talked for a while about everything going on with the clown situation. The conversation wasn't focused on my actions like I had expected. The officer was more interested in what my thoughts were on how to deal with this clown situation that was currently paralyzing the town. I think he saw my actions as more brave than incriminating, like I wanted. I could still be a hero. After a couple of hours, we came to an agreement on the situation. The sheriff's office would turn a blind eye to any investigations I wanted to conduct alone, even after hours. However, any criminal activity would be penalized to the fullest extent, especially assault. He made it very clear that no matter who was behind this, I wasn't allowed to touch a single hair on their head. It was a reasonable compromise. That night, I returned to my post. It was a lot easier without having to stay out of sight. A simple nod of acknowledgement was the only exchange I had with the officers patrolling the streets. When I made it to school, I found no signs of life yet again. I climbed the tree and settled in for a long night. About 2 hours into my wait, I still hadn't seen any signs of a clown. My eyes were getting heavier by the minute, so I made a decision to inspect the grounds and see if I could discover anything indicating a clown might be in the area. When I jumped to the ground from the lowest branch, I was greeted by a tall figure wearing a bright, shiny blue bodysuit that was bedazzled with buttons and patterns. I'd be lying if I said I didn't fall back against the tree, gasping for air. All confidence left my body as my eyes met its face. I had been expecting a poor silicone mask, not a white human face with red lips and blue hair staring back at me. The lack of a red nose unsettled me as well. This wasn't the clown I was prepared for. I couldn't move. My body had shut down on me when I needed it most. The clown didn't move. It didn't even blink. It just stared at me deeply with bright green eyes and a smile that was permanently affixed on his face. A standoff. After a few more minutes, the clown reached one of its white-gloved hands out to me. I looked to its hand and then back to those oddly bright eyes without budging an inch. Nothing about the clown had changed aside from its arm. It still didn't blink. It still had that fucking smile. It nodded a couple of times towards its hand like it wanted me to grab it. I was confused. But with the hope of humanity being behind the costume, I reached out to shake the outstretched hand. Before I was able to fully lock palms with the clown, I was met with a light shock that radiated up my forearm. I screamed. The clown arched its head back, grabbed its belly, and laughed at me. It sounded like there was a broken squeaky toy lodged in its throat. The electric jolt must have been enough to revitalize my body as I jumped up and shoved the clown away from me as hard as I could. It fell back in an exaggerated manner, flailing its large white shoes up and sliding on its rear end across the grass. After a brief pause and a look of disbelief, the clown began to silently cry while rotating its fist under its squinting eyes and stomping its heels into the ground. I was annoyed with the dramatics and started yelling at it. Nothing remotely coherent came from my mouth, just a smorgasbord of profanities and blame. Once I relieved my pent-up frustrations, the clown stopped pouting and began its squeaky laugh again. But this time it was accompanied by another noise. A louder noise that wasn't coming from its mouth. The air around me was overtaken by a sound that was similar to a million cicadas clicking in a deep whisper. I couldn't hear the clown in front of me any longer. Everything was this overtaken by whatever was making this background noise. I fell back again, grasping my head in pain and attempting to cover my ears. Bang! My heart stopped. I looked up and the clown in front of me was now a rose scorch, painting across the grass. My interrogating officer was standing next to me with a shotgun. "Run!" he yelled at me as he grabbed my arm and yanked me to my feet. Surrounding the entire were clowns of all shapes and sizes walking towards us, with their mouths open, slightly facing the ground. We barely made it to station, circumnavigating all the clowns that overtook the streets. It's been 38 days since that incident. We've been barricaded in the station, taking rotating shifts in the camera room. The clowns, they were taking our everyday lives. We watched them go shopping, walk dogs, go to school and work. It's like they're trying to replace us. The only peculiar thing they do is surround the station at night and laugh in unison. All night until the sun rises. Then they continue on like nothing happened. We've got full utility access here and have been keeping up on the news. We know it's spreading. I fear that my actions that night may have caused them to resent humans. I wanted to be a hero, but I can find a way to stop this. Greenville is gone. Don't let the media fool you. Stay away from here. More importantly, don't go near the clowns.
I'm 15, so please excuse all errors. I'm also bilingual. So one Sunday afternoon, I was waiting at the bus stop alone after an outing with a friend to the mall. The bus stop I was at was the final stop for all buses, so there were many buses coming and going and staying. I saw a bus driver get onto a bus and asked him if he was a 14. He said that he wasn't going to be driving, so I said okay, and patiently waited for my bus. A few minutes later, I saw him get onto a bus. He made eye contact with me. I think he was wearing sunglasses. Then he gestured with his hand to come to him. So me, trying to be a nice, kind person, I did just that. He told me to take off my mask because he couldn't understand me when he then proceeded to tell me how beautiful I am, and how I was such a rare beauty, and how he's never seen anyone as beautiful as me before, and who gave me these gleaming eyes, etc. I am used to guys who are significantly older than me hitting on me, because I am well aware I am pretty, and I look 18. So I generally like to inform them that I'm 15, and they tend to leave me alone after that. But this guy didn't seem to care one bit that I had just turned 15, and continued to flirt even though he was 26. He proceeded to make sexual comments about my body, and kept looking at my chest. He was about my height. I'm 154 centimeters, 5 feet tall. After 10 minutes of conversation, he asked me about my sex life, and I had enough. So I texted my mom to call me. When I was on the phone with her, I was getting off the bus, and he grabbed my hand. I yanked it away from him and got off feeling sick. We went to the police station to report it, and I had to do a confrontation. Basically, they brought him in with zero warning, and I had to tell at him / confront him. He argued like a 7-year-old, and I got him to confess in 6 minutes.
This happened in college, maybe 7 years ago. At the time, I was living with one of my best friends, and we were very into the bar scene and partying. We lived in a city that was very inundated with college kids, so it was never hard to find a party, and I'm ashamed to admit it, but probably every other night, I was out partying my ass off. So the story starts on a night, very much like every other. She and I got all dressed up and went on a bar crawl. We ended up at this club. It was one of the more popular ones in the area, and we meet up with my ex-roommate. The three of us are having a great night, but periodically, we were all interacting with this one guy. None of us remember his name, but he seemed normal enough. Just around. He sat next to us on the smoking porch and bummed a cig from me. He bought my friend a drink. He was dancing next to us. We even all had a little flippant conversation together, although I can't for the life of me remember what it was about. But he was there, in the periphery, all night. Around 1 AM, the three of us decide that we're drunk enough and done dancing, and my ex-roommate invites me and her bestie to her place to smoke some weed. None of us have cars at this point, but it's a nice night, and she only lives a couple of miles away, so we start walking. The downtown streets quickly turn into a semi-residential, semi-warehouse district area. Not the best part of town, or the most populated, but not a bad area by any means, and usually the streets are fully empty. We're maybe about halfway to the house when we notice there's someone behind us, trailing along and getting closer. We really don't think anything of it until we pause to light up some cigarettes, and he catches up, and we realize it's the guy who had been hanging around us at the bar. He's kind of stumbly, clearly drunk, and he greets us like old friends. We don't want to be rude, but it strikes all of us as kind of weird that he's there to begin with, but we shrug it off because he's clearly drunk and seemingly harmless. I should say right here, he's a real scrawny guy, on the taller side but thin with a baby face and big eyes. He just looks generally harmless and drunk. He asks if he can bum a smoke, and walks with us until he gets where he's going. Which isn't far, he's just pretty drunk and not sure he'll make it. And he's clearly very unsteady in his feet, so we say sure, why not? So we're walking and chatting and we're getting closer to our destination, but he doesn't make any indication of where he's going. So finally I ask him, "Where do you live anyway?" And he gives me this funny look, like I'd asked something really stupid, and he says, "Oh, I don't live anywhere near here." This kind of creeps us all out, and we sort of stop where we are, and I'm like, "Okay, well, then where are you going?" And he goes, "Oh, I'm following you." At this point, I think there's been maybe like a misunderstanding in his mind. So I respond with something along the lines of, "Okay, well, no offense, but we don't even know your name. You're not coming with us." And he gets this look, like hurt, but also angry, and a little manic. And he gets kind of loud, and he says, "But I told you all my name. I told each of you my name. How do none of you remember my name?" At this point, my roommate steps in and goes, "Look man, I know you're drunk, but you need to calm down." And the guy stops and gets real calm real fast. And he gets this really serious look and he says, No, I'm not drunk, I'm fine. I just knew you'd trust me more if you thought I was drunk." At that point, I'm like, fuck no, I'm out. But my roomie doesn't believe him, and she says something like, "No, you've been stumbling this whole time, of course you're drunk." And he shakes his head, and in a completely calm tone, with no slurring whatsoever, he goes, "No, I'm sober. I just wanted to see if you'd let me in the house." And my friend goes, "Why?" And this guy gets this huge smile, and his big eyes get even wider, and he says, "I just wanted to see how close I could get to killing you." At that point, I'd had enough, and I put on my authority voice, and I tell him that this is enough, and that we're leaving, and he needs to go the other fucking direction, before I call the cops. He just shrugs and says, "Fine," and we scurry away, leaving him leaning up against a stop sign, just smoking a cig and watching us go. As soon as we are around the corner, we all break into a dead sprint and run for a few blocks, then stop and freak out. We were in the middle of a panic whisper huddle, when my friend looks over my shoulder and lets out this little scream. We turn around, and there he is. It's dark, so we can't really see his face, just his silhouette against the street lamps. But there was enough to know it was definitely him. He's striding down the road a few blocks down, hands in his pockets, not a trace of a stumble. And he's not exactly running, but he's walking at this real brisk pace. And he'd been on us in less than a minute. Luckily, we were only a block away from my friend's place, so we start booking it there. We're almost at the front door when I realize, shit, we don't want him to know where we're going, not the three of us alone. That seems dangerous as hell. Fortune shines on us, as up the block I can see the telltale signs of a garage party, and we book it over there instead. We come up to the front lawn, and there's a bunch of dudes out front, and we're breathlessly trying to explain ourselves. But when we turn around to point out the guy, he's nowhere to be seen. The partiers sympathized and let us hang for a few hours, and a few of them even walked us back to the house. Thankfully, we never saw the dude again, and needless to say, my friends and I lost our taste for partying for quite a while after that.
The world is a very scary place, and by scary, I mean you can't trust anyone. Now, there isn't much to this story, which is okay, because I don't think I could actually tell it all if there were. This isn't something that I would normally talk about, but I feel it's time to share what has happened to me. It was my first semester of college, my first time really being on my own, and man, did I think I was ready for it. I made the hour-and-a-half long drive from my town to the one where my college campus was in. The first day wasn't all that bad. I mean, I had to go to the building where the workout equipment was to get registered to take my photo for the college ID and to get directions to the building that my dorm was in. The campus wasn't really that big. The RA gave me a general description of where everything was. My brother and brother-in-law at the time were helping me move all of my things into the building where my dorm room was, which was really awesome of them to do. I met the girls that I would be sharing my dorm with. They all were pretty nice. But the building next to mine had all the male athletes in it. The first thing I did after officially getting moved into my dorm, I went outside and lit up a cigarette, not knowing that, oh hey, you can't smoke on campus. It took me the entire night to figure out why the upperclassmen were staring at me weirdly, yet none of them had the decency to fucking tell me. Now, I spent the entire night outside on the concrete sidewalk getting to know the girls I was sharing my dorm with. They were actually really nice and didn't live too far from where my hometown was, so that was awesome. The guys in the dorm next to ours were nice, but one of them was odd. He seemed really nice at first. He introduced himself, sat with me during the orientation, and told me where I could go if I wanted to smoke a cigarette. Which was cool at first, because it really helped me having him had already been there for a year. It was pretty cool that we became friends really quick, but I hadn't realized that his friendship was more to him than what I thought it was. It started out with the small things. He would find me after my class and walk me to the cafeteria for lunch, or to my dorm, so I wouldn't have to get bombarded by people. This guy was a football player, tall, broad shoulders, muscles for days, the stereotypical type. Anyways, he actually started to get a little clingy. He wouldn't want to go back to his dorm. He wanted to sleep on the small futon in my dorm room. He wanted to walk me to and from class, have lunch and dinner with me, smoke a cigarette anytime he would notice me outside. I didn't really mind having someone to walk to class with, or to have someone to talk to when I was feeling a bit stressed out about classes, so I didn't think much of it. It was about a month and a half into the semester that he really started to get attached. This guy literally started to make any excuse possible so he could get out of football practice. He'd tap on my bedroom window when I wouldn't answer his text back, or when I was trying to sleep. I wasn't able to get my studying done because he would bother the ever-loving shit out of me. Like, this guy really went to great lengths just to have my attention. And let me tell you, it got really annoying real fast. I finally had enough of the sleepless nights, the total feeling of being utterly exhausted all the time, and the persistent nagging which was honestly causing me to stress. So I told him that it was best if we were not to be around each other for a while. You know, take some time to make different friends. He seemed to take it pretty well, at least, that's what I thought. I hadn't realized that he was following me everywhere that I went around campus. Hadn't realized that he'd followed me all the way back home one time and found out where I lived. Hadn't realized how much my presence meant to this guy until his roommate told me that his walls were covered in my pictures. Pictures of me in my bedroom, in class, in the cafeteria, in the library, walking around town, you name it. I literally didn't realize how fucking audacious this guy was until he literally broke into my dorm one night, crept into my bedroom, and put his hand over my mouth to wake me up. This was the moment I realized he was fucking crazy. I told him straight up we couldn't be friends, but he told me he just couldn't find anybody else that understood him the way I did. I was really fucking glad when my personal reasons for dropping out of college appeared, because it was the only reason why I was actually able to get away from this whacked out weirdo. I haven't seen him since that night, nor do I care to ever see him again. I wish his story was longer, but again, I couldn't bear to say any more than this, and this was hard enough to tell. The best advice I can give you, to anyone, is to not trust people. If you have a gut feeling about someone, trust it and get the fuck out of Dodge.
It was Christmas Eve and I was a freshman in high school. My family has been split up for some time, so normally we trade off a Christmas Day and a Christmas Eve every year. And this year, I was home early from my grandparents' Christmas party, while everyone else went to my aunt and uncle's celebrating at another party. When I was dropped off, my cousins offered to stay with me for a few hours, yet I declined. I thought I could watch some of my new DVDs and get some alone time in the house, since that was a rarity. I had noticed an unfamiliar car parked on the street, but didn't think anything of it considering it was Christmas Eve. Probably a neighbor's relative or something, I thought. After I got inside, I locked the door, grabbed snacks, and started to settle down. I hadn't yet been home for 15 minutes when I heard a knock at the door. I unlocked the door and opened it only a crack to see a man standing there. Dark hair, glasses, slightly overweight, and dressed casually. He didn't look like much of a threat, but yet my stomach dropped. He asked, "I was wondering about the car outside. Is it for sale?" I told him I didn't think so. "Is there someone here I can talk about it?" I said, and yet quite stupidly I might add. "No, you can come back another time." And I shut the door and turned the lock as fast as possible. He reached for the handle immediately and started pounding on the door. I heard a string of profanities and the pounding stopped. Terrified, I was crawling on the floor to the phone, hoping that he wouldn't be able to see me through one of the windows. Then I heard the noises. Our house had an open garage door and it led through to the laundry room, where the door lock was broken and no one had bothered to fix it. Just then I heard a man yell, and I saw the man through the window run to his car and drive off. My uncle had gotten home just in time and scared the man off. Who knows what would have happened if he hadn't been home in time. Sadly, we didn't get the plate number, and nothing ever came of it, but I'll never be home alone on a holiday again.
When I was 15, I traveled to Europe with my family. We stayed in Natal, Germany, in a small inn for a few nights. My parents had a double bed on the second floor, my sisters had the double bedroom next to theirs, and I was lucky enough to have a single room all to myself at the far end of the hall. When we went to check into our rooms, as soon as I entered the hallway our rooms were in, I remember almost feeling though I walked into a wall of bad energy. I just felt so unnerved and uneasy in that hallway, but I passed it off as an overactive imagination. I slept the first night without any issue other than waking up a few times. But the next morning at breakfast, one of my sisters mentioned feeling really uncomfortable in the hallway, almost as if the air was crushing. It unnerved me even more that I wasn't the only one who felt weirded out. Plus, she was an adult at the time, so it further cemented in my head that the wing of the hotel was odd. Later that night, I'm sleeping peacefully, when about 2 a.m., I'm woken by something ripping the covers off of me and being jerked about 2 feet towards the end of the bed by my ankle. At first, I thought someone had broken into my room because when I turned towards what had grabbed me, a huge looming black shape was visible in the darkness, like a man was in my room. I frantically flipped the light on, only to have been nothing there. The window was locked from the inside, there was no one in the closet or bathroom, and my room was also still locked from the inside. I stayed up the rest of the night scared, playing Cooking Mama on my DS. The next morning we were at breakfast and my sister mentions that she was up half the night because she thought she saw a person silhouetted against the wall of the room. But when she turned on the light, there was no one there. It was just a bizarre and creepy experience. We checked out that day, so I didn't get to experience anything else after that. But it still freaks me out to this day.
Hi, thanks for watching the video. I really appreciate it. If you want to send me a story to read, feel free to do so. My email is in the description of the video. And if you want to follow me on my social media, just to get updates or maybe to talk, the links and info for my Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram accounts are also in the description. And finally, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And turn that bell on to be notified for upcoming surprises. And remember, your fear feeds me.